The desert is silent. Not the peaceful kind of silence. The kind that feels heavy, as if something happened here long ago and the ground never forgot. Miles from cities, far beyond highways and tourist maps, lies one of America's strangest landscapes. At first glance it looks impossible. Thousands of aircraft, bombers, fighters, transport planes, wing after wing stretching toward the horizon like an army frozen in time. Machines built for war, left to die beneath the sun. And for decades most people never knew this place existed. Because hidden in the American desert was a graveyard large enough to bury an air force. A graveyard filled with the ghosts of World War II. And every aircraft has a story. Some carried young men into combat over Europe. Some survived anti-aircraft fire over the Pacific. Some returned home with bullet holes in their wings, while their crews never returned again. Yet after surviving the deadliest war in human history, they ended here. Abandoned. Forgotten. Waiting. The question is, why? Why would a nation spend unimaginable amounts of money building these aircraft only to leave them baking under endless desert skies? Why were thousands hidden away? And what secrets still remain among the wreckage? Because this isn't simply a story about old airplanes. This is a story about war, fear, power, and what happens when the greatest military machine on Earth suddenly discovers it no longer needs the weapons that won a world war. To understand the graveyard, you must first understand the moment the world changed. World War II was ending. Across Europe, cities burned. Entire generations had disappeared. Millions were dead. The war had consumed nations. Factories that once produced refrigerators or cars had transformed into engines of war. Everything became weapons. Steel became tanks. Rubber became tires for military trucks. And America became something the world had never seen before. A manufacturing giant. By war's end, American factories produced aircraft at almost unimaginable speed. Workers assembled bombers around the clock. Women and men worked day and night. New aircraft rolled off production lines faster than many countries could destroy them. During the war, quantity meant survival. More planes, more pilots, more missions. Victory depended on overwhelming force. And it worked. The skies over Europe and the Pacific became dominated by Allied aircraft. Heavy bombers crossed oceans. Fighters escorted missions through enemy territory. Transport planes supplied troops. The United States built so many aircraft that by the end of World War II, it possessed one of the largest air fleets ever assembled. Then suddenly, the war stopped. Celebrations erupted. Families reunited. Soldiers came home. Factories slowed. The world wanted peace. But peace created a problem. America now owned mountains of military equipment designed for a war that no longer existed. Ships, vehicles, weapons, and aircraft. Thousands upon thousands of aircraft. Keeping them active cost enormous money. Maintenance crews, fuel, storage, repairs, pilots. The government faced a question no one expected. What do you do with an air force built for global war, when the war is over? Destroy them? Sell them? Store them? No option seemed simple. Then someone looked toward the desert. The dry climate offered something unusual. Low humidity, minimal rain, conditions that slowed corrosion. Metal survived longer. Aircraft aged slower. Perfect for preservation. And so began one of the largest migrations of machines in history. Aircraft arrived by the hundreds, then thousands. Pilots ferried warplanes into remote locations. One final flight. One final landing. For some crews, they didn't know it would be the last time their aircraft touched a runway. Imagine being a pilot. You survived combat. You watched friends disappear during missions. You trusted your aircraft to bring you home. And after years of war, you land in a desert. Shut down the engine. Hear silence replace roaring propellers. Climb out. Walk away. Never return. Your aircraft remains behind. Waiting. Year after year. Decade after decade. The desert became crowded. Rows formed. Then endless columns. Bombers parked beside fighters. Transport aircraft beside reconnaissance planes. A metallic city appeared beneath open skies. Some aircraft remained untouched. Others were dismantled for parts. Some would eventually return to service during later conflicts. Many would never fly again. Their purpose ended. Their war finished. Their stories unfinished. Yet the graveyard held something strange. Even in silence, these aircraft seemed alive. Paint faded. Windows cracked. Metal heated beneath brutal sunlight. But their shapes remained. Almost ready. Almost waiting. as if tomorrow someone might restart the engines, and war would begin again, because that fear never completely disappeared. By the late 1940s, another shadow emerged: the Cold War. Former allies became rivals. New tensions grew. The world changed again. Suddenly preserving old aircraft no longer seemed foolish. Maybe they'd be needed. Maybe another conflict would come. Many aircraft stayed. Stored against uncertainty. Stored against fear. Stored because history had taught governments something dangerous. Peace can end faster than people expect. Years passed. Technology advanced. Jet aircraft replaced propeller-driven machines. New weapons appeared. Old aircraft became relics. Yet the graveyards remained, expanding, quiet, hidden from public imagination. Few people realized entire landscapes existed filled with sleeping war machines. And somewhere among those rows stood aircraft connected to extraordinary stories. Bombers that survived impossible missions. Transports that evacuated soldiers. Aircraft carrying scars from enemy fire. Each machine remembered something: a storm, a battle, a crew, a final mission. Metal keeps history differently than books. Books fade. Witnesses die. But bullet holes remain. Scratches remain. Repairs remain. The aircraft become evidence. Proof that someone once climbed inside believing they might never come home. That's what makes these graveyards unsettling. You aren't merely looking at machines. You're looking at memories frozen in aluminum and steel. And perhaps that's why visitors often describe strange emotions. Not fear. Not sadness. Something harder to explain. Because standing among thousands of abandoned warplanes forces a question. How many dreams ended here? How many young pilots disappeared while these aircraft survived? History often remembers victories, parades, generals, famous battles. But these forgotten machines tell another story. The story after victory. The story of what nations do when wars end. The story of how even the most powerful weapons eventually become silent. Today, many of these aircraft graveyards still exist. Some remain active storage facilities. Others became museums. Some continue hiding beyond public attention. Rows of aircraft still wait beneath desert skies. Preserved by climate. Protected by isolation. Guarded by time itself. And if you walk among them at sunset, when shadows stretch across old runways, you might understand why people call these places cemeteries. Because the aircraft aren't the only things buried there. Entire eras are buried there. Memories, fears, victories, losses, the remains of a world at war. And among thousands of silent wings, history is still waiting to be heard. The first thing visitors notice isn't the size. It's the order. Because chaos would make sense. War leaves chaos. Abandoned things usually become scattered, broken, forgotten. But these aircraft stand in rows. Perfect rows. Long geometric lines stretching across desert earth as if someone expected an inspection to happen at any moment. Thousands of wings. Thousands of engines. Thousands of silent machines arranged with military precision. From above, the graveyard almost looks alive. Like an air force waiting for orders. And perhaps that's the strangest part. Many of these aircraft were never truly abandoned. Some were placed into storage with hope. Hope that one day they might fly again. The desert became less a cemetery, and more a waiting room between wars. By the late 1940s and early 1950s, military planners understood something uncomfortable. World peace was uncertain. The alliance that defeated Nazi Germany had fractured. The Cold War began. The Soviet Union expanded influence. Fear returned. Suddenly old aircraft carried value again. If another conflict erupted, America might need them. And so thousands remained preserved beneath dry skies. Their engines covered. Windows sealed. Sensitive equipment removed. Maintenance crews occasionally inspected them. Some aircraft sat untouched for years. Others waited decades. Imagine that. A bomber surviving World War II. Then spending 20 years parked in silence. Longer than many of the crews who once flew it remained alive. Time changed everything around these aircraft. Presidents changed. Technology changed. Human beings walked on the moon. Yet rows of old warplanes remained exactly where they were. Waiting. Then came another shocking reality. Many aircraft that survived combat over Europe or the Pacific faced a different enemy. Economics. War is expensive. Peace can be expensive too. Maintaining thousands of unused aircraft cost enormous money. Eventually governments made decisions. Not every aircraft deserved preservation. Not every machine could become history. Some became spare parts. Engines removed. instruments stripped, propellers detached, useful components salvaged to keep newer aircraft flying. One airplane died, so another might survive. It happened quietly. No ceremony. No headlines. A machine once trusted by crews during combat slowly disappeared piece by piece. Then came scrapping. Metal cutters arrived. Aircraft reduced to aluminum. Wings separated. Fuselages crushed. Years of engineering transformed into raw material. Some veterans later described witnessing this process. Watching bombers they once flew being dismantled. Watching symbols of survival become scrap. For many, it felt personal. Because pilots often spoke about aircraft almost as living companions. They gave them names. Painted nose art. Trusted them during impossible missions. An aircraft wasn't merely equipment. Sometimes it meant survival. Which makes one story especially haunting. After World War II, numerous aircraft arrived at storage carrying visible damage from combat. Bullet holes patched. Sections repaired. Evidence of battles remained. Workers processing these aircraft occasionally discovered things left behind. Old maps. Personal notes. Crew belongings. Names scratched into metal. Tiny reminders that history had happened inside these cockpits. One recovered aircraft reportedly still contained handwritten markings from missions flown years earlier. Imagine opening an abandoned bomber decades later and seeing evidence of the young crew who once believed tomorrow might kill them. History becomes intimate in moments like that. The graveyard stops feeling mechanical and starts feeling human. Because war was always human. The aircraft merely carried people through it. Yet among thousands of forgotten machines, certain aircraft achieved second lives. The outbreak of the Korean War changed priorities. Suddenly military planners revisited stored aircraft. Some returned to service. Old warbirds left desert storage and flew again. Engines restarted after years of silence. Pilots climbed aboard machines built for another generation's war. Think about that. An aircraft parked in desert heat. Awakened years later. Called back into service. Almost resurrected. The graveyard gave birth to new missions. Not all returns ended well. Technology advanced rapidly. Jet aircraft transformed warfare. Propeller-driven bombers that once represented cutting-edge engineering became obsolete. Progress is ruthless. The newest invention eventually becomes yesterday's technology. Even legends age. And World War II aircraft aged fast. But obsolescence doesn't erase importance. Because many modern aviation breakthroughs stand on foundations built during World War II. Navigation systems evolved. Engine technology improved. Manufacturing changed. The war accelerated aviation development at astonishing speed. The graveyards became accidental museums documenting that evolution. Walk down one row. You see older designs. Walk farther. Technology changes. Aircraft become larger, faster, more advanced. The desert quietly records history. Then there are the rumors. Every enormous forgotten place attracts stories. Whispers spread over decades. Secret aircraft, experimental projects, hidden prototypes. Some rumors proved false. Others contained fragments of truth. Because military storage facilities occasionally housed unusual machines. Aircraft never intended for public attention. Projects abandoned before completion. Experimental designs overtaken by newer technology. The Cold War intensified secrecy. And secrecy fuels imagination. Visitors wondered, what exactly lies beyond the visible rows? What stories remain classified? Questions survive longer than answers. Yet perhaps the most powerful thing about these graveyards is simpler. Scale. Numbers fail to prepare people. Photographs struggle too. Only standing among endless rows communicates the truth. Human beings built this. Factories produced these machines. Workers assembled them. Pilots flew them. Governments funded them. Entire economies transformed around warfare. The graveyards reveal something uncomfortable. The industrial power required for global war is almost beyond comprehension. Each aircraft represents labor, resources, money, human effort. Multiply that by thousands. Then imagine similar production happening across multiple nations during World War II. Suddenly the scale of war becomes terrifying. Historians often discuss battles. But graveyards reveal infrastructure. The hidden machinery behind conflict. That realization changes how people view these places. They stop appearing as collections of old airplanes. And become monuments. Monuments to an era when humanity mobilized everything for survival. Some visitors report hearing strange sounds. Wind moving through hollow fuselages. Metal expanding beneath heat. Whispers created by desert air. Rational explanations exist. But standing alone among abandoned aircraft at dusk, rational thoughts sometimes lose strength. Because atmosphere matters. The sun lowers. Shadows lengthen. Rows become silhouettes. And for brief moments, it becomes easy to imagine engines roaring again. Easy to imagine crews preparing for missions. Easy to imagine history returning. Then silence reminds you. Those days ended long ago. The crews aged. Many died. Generations passed. The aircraft remained. Perhaps that's why graveyards feel emotional. Machines outlived people. The bombers survived longer than many of the young men who flew them. Metal endured. Human lives did not. History contains cruel ironies. One veteran reportedly revisited an aircraft years after war ended. He placed his hand against the fuselage and stood silently. No speech. No dramatic moment. Just memory. Because memory doesn't disappear simply because decades pass. Sometimes old aluminum can unlock entire worlds. Friends remembered. Fear remembered. Survival remembered. The graveyards preserve more than aircraft. They preserve echoes. And then there's the ultimate question. What happens to the final survivors? As decades passed, museums rescued certain aircraft. Restoration teams worked tirelessly. Engines rebuilt. Paint restored. Cockpits repaired. Machines once destined for scrap returned to life. Some fly today. Crowds watch them during airshows. Children stare upward. The roar of World War II engines still fills skies. For brief moments, history breathes again. Yet countless others remain in storage. Waiting. Rows shrinking slowly through restoration, recycling, or decay. Time continues its work. Even deserts cannot preserve forever. Eventually every machine loses. Every metal weakens. Every structure fades. The graveyard itself changes. But perhaps that's fitting. Because impermanence is part of the story. Wars end. Weapons disappear. Generations pass. Nothing remains untouched forever. Except memory. And memory is why these places matter. The aircraft graveyards hidden in America's deserts aren't simply collections of old machines. They are reminders, warnings, evidence, proof of what humanity can build, and what humanity can destroy. Yet one final mystery remains. Because beneath the silence, beneath rows of forgotten wings, lies a deeper question. When the world's greatest war ended, did these aircraft become relics? Or monuments to a future humanity hopes never to repeat? The sun is setting now. The desert changes color. Orange becomes red. Red becomes shadow. And slowly, the endless rows of aircraft disappear into darkness. At this hour, the graveyard feels different. Less like storage, more like memory. Because throughout the day, these machines seem silent. But at sunset, they almost feel as if they're remembering. Remembering engines at full power. Remembering young crews laughing before missions because fear was easier to hide behind jokes. Remembering nights over Europe illuminated by anti-aircraft fire. Remembering oceans beneath their wings. Storms. Losses. Victories. The strange thing about abandoned aircraft is this. They survived. Many of the people who flew them did not. Some pilots never reached their 20th birthday. Some navigators disappeared over enemy territory and were never found. Some families spent years waiting for letters that would never come. Yet decades later, their aircraft remained, standing in desert silence. That reality changes how these graveyards should be seen. They are not junkyards, not collections of obsolete machines. They are monuments. Monuments built unintentionally. Because every aircraft parked beneath those skies represents human stories. Someone trusted it. Someone feared inside it. Someone looked through its cockpit windows wondering if home would ever be seen again. History often remembers famous generals, important speeches, great victories. But ordinary people carried wars. Young mechanics, radio operators, gunners, pilots, crew members whose names faded with time. The graveyards remember them differently. Not through statues. Not through textbooks. But through metal. Through scars. Through worn-out interiors touched by hands long gone. And perhaps that's why visitors leave changed. They arrive expecting to see airplanes. They leave thinking about people. About how quickly generations disappear. About how enormous world events become personal when reduced to one cockpit. One mission. One crew. Because wars are measured in numbers. But loss is always individual. One person. One family. One empty seat at a dinner table. The aircraft graveyards quietly understand that. The years continue moving forward. Technology evolves faster than ever. Modern military aircraft can do things World War II pilots would consider impossible. Computers replaced many calculations. New materials replaced old engineering. The world changed. Yet hidden beneath desert skies, the old aircraft remain, waiting. Their purpose ended long ago, but their meaning did not. Maybe that is their final mission. Not combat, not transport, not survival. Memory. To remind future generations what total war looked like. What nations built when survival demanded everything. And what remained afterward. Silence. Rows of machines. And questions. Always questions. Was the cost worth it? Could humanity learn? Would future generations avoid repeating history? No aircraft can answer. No graveyard offers certainty. The desert keeps its silence. Perhaps because silence forces people to think. And thinking matters. Especially now. Because history rarely repeats in identical ways. But human fear repeats. Ambition repeats. Conflict repeats. The world that created those aircraft believed destruction would secure peace. Sometimes it did. Sometimes it failed. The lesson remains unfinished. Maybe that's why these places endure. Not simply as reminders of World War II, but reminders of humanity itself. Its brilliance, its resilience, its capacity for creation and destruction. As darkness falls completely over the graveyard, shapes vanish one by one. The bombers disappear. The fighters disappear. The endless rows fade into night. Until only silence remains. The same silence that began this story. Heavy, uncomfortable, ancient. But if you stood there long enough, among forgotten wings and abandoned runways, you might realize something unexpected. These aircraft were never truly hidden. Not from history. Not from memory. Because history waits patiently. And eventually, someone returns to listen. The engine stopped decades ago. The mission's ended. The war is over. Yet beneath the desert sky, America's secret World War II plane graveyard still whispers a message. Even when wars end, their echoes remain.